People are our biggest challenge. That's why, to me, cybersecurity, stranger danger is something that we should really start stressing in every organization, in every career field, in everything that we do and that we teach.
I'm Tracy Gonzalez-Pedron, the Director of the Values and Ethics Initiative at UCCS and a professor here at the College of Business. I want to first let you, just fill you in, if you haven't been to a roundtable before, what the purpose is. This is for educators and staff. This is to discuss some of the ethical issues in an area, usually presented by one of our fellows, that's the norm. And what we do is have the fellow introduce their topic. And even though you don't teach information systems, you still will have some issues, for instance, that in your classes that you could use, or even in your units of your staff. So if there's any ideas that you would like us to include, we can do that. I introduce our very brave fellow that didn't know any better and volunteered for the first one, which, but it's a good topic.
Hi, good morning. Thought I would kind of give you a little background of who I am and find out how I got voluntold to be up here. So I'm still pretty new to academia. I've only been here in the School of Business for like a year and a half. Prior to that, I spent 30 plus years as a senior executive in various companies, software companies and engineering firms and things like that. And I was just lucky enough to have the opportunity to teach. To be perfectly honest, my thinking was when I got closer to retirement age, this was what I would do, because I'm not the type of person to just sit around and do stuff. But an opportunity came up, and so I left the corporate, sort of left the corporate sector. I still do consulting and things for businesses. And a lot of what I do in my consulting is certainly technology and software development and such, but I also do penetration testing. And the penetration testing I specialize in is non-technical. I do social engineering. I use the psychology and understanding of how people behave, and I have yet to not be able to get in and penetrate an organization. And as I jumped into academia, it occurred to me as I noticed what we were teaching and what everybody's all excited about cybersecurity, and it's the new hot topic, and we all want certificates and all kinds of cool things. But there's an element of cybersecurity that I felt we were very much missing out on. And I think it is the biggest risk that we face in organizations. And it's something that I didn't see a lot of education being done for our students and organizations for their biggest risk. And I like to call it stranger danger, because you'll probably remember, for most of us growing up, right, we had the terrible after-school program things that don't take candy from a stranger, or in between the Saturday morning cartoons and all of that kind of stuff. And while they were cheesy and kind of campy and sort of weird, they had an important point. They were a way to get it drilled into our heads as kids. There are people out in the world that mean to do you harm. But we aren't really doing the equivalent of that for employees or for students. We hand 10-year-old and 11-year-old kids a supercomputer in their pocket that has the culmination of human experience and knowledge at any search, and we don't give them any safeguards or education or training on what do we do about that, let alone train and educate the parents. Hey, you just handed this phone that you're going to regret for the next 4 years of your life, right? We don't do anything to educate those parents. And so it occurred to me that maybe what we need to be focusing on is those people that are not technical. How do we educate people that cybersecurity is not just a technical issue? We have lots of training and programs for that. But how do we teach people that there's lots of non-technical things that can happen?
Oh, yeah. So
sure.
You're teaching the students how to impact.
Kind of. I'm teaching them techniques that are used so that they can defend themselves against those techniques. Because social engineering is one of the most powerful ways to get into an organization. And it's kind of confusing, because most people, when I show them that, they go, wait a minute, hackers don't look like Jess. Hackers look like this guy. Right? They're all meth head hackers in black hoodies, and they sit in a basement and live in their parents' house and that kind of stuff. That's actually not true. Some of the most talented hackers, social engineering, those of you that know psychology better than I do, I'm sorry the way the world is, but the better looking you are, the more charming you are, the more you can get away with. The more people will trust you, the more people will let you do things. And so social engineering, we use those things. When I'm doing social engineering hacks on institutions, the first thing I do is I just do a little intel. I sit out in the parking lot, watch. What time does everybody show up? Do they all go through the side door? Do they go through the front door? Does it look like they're wearing a badge with the lanyard? People are generally helpful, so I take advantage of that helpfulness. I wear a lanyard that looks kind of like theirs. I know how to use Photoshop. I can make something that looks like that. And then I'll walk in, dressed however they dress, with a whole bunch of stuff in my arm, and stand, oh my gosh, I'm a new guy, and they'll helpfully hold the door open for me. All of the artificial intelligence-driven intrusion detection systems and firewalls and all the most expensive hardware in the world can't save you from somebody that holds the door open for me so I can plug a little USB stick into a company computer. There's no software on earth that can save you from that. So we need to understand as individuals, there are strangers in the world. And we unleash our kids on all of these social media platforms without giving them any education or knowledge as to what's being done with those social media platforms. For example, when I started asking my students when I first came here, and I started discussing with them, do you understand the kind of data and information you're bleeding out into the world? Their response was, well, I like Snapchat because all the snaps go away. They get deleted. Snapchat, it doesn't save the snaps. And then I show them in the license agreement, that 77-page long thing that nobody ever reads, they just check the box. Actually, Snapchat specifically tells you they save all snaps for a minimum of 30 days in case law enforcement needs it. Minimum of 30 days. And then I explain to them, well, it's just like an email. If I send you an email, do I now have control over what you do with that email? Do I have any controls over what you do with that? It's the same thing with the snap. It astonished me the lack of understanding for these folks as to what's being done, let alone the malicious things like Facebook doing a social experiment on 800,000 people. Right? Facebook did a social experiment where they chose randomly about 870,000 people, and they were putting artificial, fake posts on their walls. And they were measuring their responses and their subsequent posts to see if they could influence their behavior one way or the other, and it was highly successful. And the psychology community went nuts and said, you're not supposed to experiment on humans without their permission. And Facebook said that they gave you permission. They checked that little box. And on page 71, paragraph 2A, subsection 9, said we were allowed to do this kind of experimentation on them. So part of what I started discovering from this is, wow, we've got a real challenge. We've got a challenge in an organizational standpoint, ethically, of what kind of data are we storing on people and what are we doing to clearly and transparently communicate what we're doing with that data. And when we get breached from a cyber attack, because it's no longer if, when we get breached, what is our response? What's our responsibility to make sure that we make people aware of that breach and what we're doing about it and how we've protected their data? But we also have an ethical responsibility as an individual. It's my responsibility to keep me safe. It's not these organizations' responsibility. It's not the government's responsibility. It's mine. And if I don't take personal responsibility to keep myself safe, how can I, as an employee within an organization, convince that organization that I'm also working to keep it safe? Because if I have sloppy techniques and tactics in what I'm doing for my own cyber protection, how can I protect them? So it's been a real challenge for us. But one of the questions I get from folks is, yeah, but how serious is this threat really? I mean, I hear stuff in the news, but nothing's happened to me. How serious is it really? This is from Bitdefender, very common antivirus. This is live. These are the known attacks worldwide that Bitdefender is currently trying to defend against, happening real time. So yeah, it happens, and you can see that it's got the attack. There's various Trojans and things that are coming through here, what type of attack it is, and which country's being hit. So it's not just the United States that's being hit, obviously. People from all over the world are under constant attack. I will tell you, in the consulting and the work that I do, when I build a new website and they say, great, I want to put it on Google's cloud, Amazon Web Services, or something like that, no exaggeration, we have about 90 seconds when we post it before we start getting hits from various bots that are looking for every new website, every new platform that hits the internet and trying to break into it. So you have to have all of your security in place before. This is another example. This is from Kaspersky. Not my greatest favorite company to work with these days, but they have a really cool graphic that looks better when it's not so dark because it's a spinning globe. But same thing. These are real-time known attacks that are happening right now. This is live. This is not a recorded video. This is live what Kaspersky is aware of around the planet. And it's hard for you to see the numbers, but for example, this is 7,349,000 and growing attacks of this type that are occurring right now in the world. Okay, but okay, so that's nation states, that's companies attacking companies, that kind of stuff. Sure, that happens. I did this in the article I did for the Colorado Springs Business Journal. This is a study that they produced, interviewed thousands of companies. The number one cyber threat they've had for several years now is our own employees. People. Far over 50% of all breaches occur because of a person, not because somebody didn't patch a firewall, not because somebody found some really new cool script to get through some sort of hardware. In fact, you probably heard of years ago a real famous hack that happened with Target. And it was covered in the news coverage of, oh, this terrible hack that happened with Target. It actually wasn't a hack. Target had an HVAC, an air conditioning contractor, that needed remote access into their network so that they could adjust temperature and reprogram logic controllers and things like that. That HVAC contractor had the username, password, and the IP address to connect to Target's network on a sticky note on his desk, and the cleaning person knew what it was and sold it to somebody. So not really a hack because technology broke down, it was because a person broke down. Now, unfortunately, technology gremlins are fighting me this morning, so I was going to hack you this morning, which always gets people bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in the morning. So some of the penetration I do with folks is on a little bitty single-board computer. This is just a case that I 3D printed. This is a Raspberry Pi is what this is called. This is a computer on a single board, and this is the big one. They have a smaller one that's about the size of this clicker. And so it allows me to do things. What I was going to demonstrate for you this morning is simple things that most people don't know that they're bleeding out in the world that we want to educate them for. So for example, what I can do is what's called a monitor a probe request. Everybody's cell phones, and I'm assuming everybody has a cell phone, right? Just out of curiosity, how many have Android? How many are carrying Android phones? The rest are iPhone? So one of the things that those cell phones do is it's convenient to connect your cell phone to a Wi-Fi network. Of course it is. Well, your cell phone remembers that network and what's called an SSID, the identification of that network. Well, anytime your cell phone is trying to connect a network, it's continuously broadcasting out a network probe. Hey, McDonald's, Panera, Starbucks, Home, UCCS, are you here? 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 Well, what that allows me to do is I can pick up all of the networks that you've connected to on your phone. Okay, so who cares? You can connect to all of my networks, right? Well, there are really entertaining people in the world that do what's called war driving. People who drive around with laptops in their cars and antennas and will capture the latitude and longitude of every network they see that can be picked up on that antenna. In this particular site, so this is the Colorado Springs area, right? You can see Chaparral. Each one of these little dots is a network in this database. So now, since I have the SSID of the network that you've connected to, I can find the lat long. So if it's your house, I know where you live. If it's your office, I know where you work. If it's a Starbucks you frequent, I know where that is. So I can start getting a pattern of behavior of where you're going to. But beyond that, now that I have the SSID and I have what's called a MAC address, it's a unique identifier of digits that tell me what your device is. Each device is going to have a unique MAC address. Now, if I want to penetrate you, I can get what's called a man-in-the-middle attack. So I can take my device here, and I can stick it in the Starbucks you always go to, stick it by the bathroom and that sort of thing, and I just wait. Because what's going to happen on cell phone devices, or most network devices, is when it tries to connect to the network, it's going to connect to the closest one with the strongest signal. So when you go to Starbucks and you get your coffee and you sit down, if my little device is closer and stronger than the network that Starbucks typically has, I can make my device be the same network name as Starbucks or Panera, and you'll connect to me instead of Starbucks and Panera. And when you connect to me, you'll still have access to the internet, but you're going through me before you go to the internet. I don't care what encrypted stuff you have, I have all of your packets, all of the data that comes across my Raspberry Pi, I now have logged. And I just have it email that data to me so I can have it. Now I have all your secrets. So if you go to Starbucks and pay your credit card bill, great, I've got your log on and password to Starbucks. I've got all of that data. And most people aren't aware, wow, I had no idea my cell phone was just leaking this data out. And unfortunately, again, the AV gremlins are hitting me, but the way I demo that to students to show them is while I'm doing the first part of the talk, I'll actually have my device scanning all of your cell phones. And then I'll take that list and I'll plot dots on the map to show you all the networks that you've been to. And it's a little bit of an eye-opener for folks when you do that sort of a thing where they say, whoa, wait a minute, I'm a little creeped out that with just a little bitty device, and oh, by the way, this is the big expensive computer, it costs $35. The little one costs $5. and I can run it off a battery, so I can take this computer and I can slip it just in a podium like this and just put it right here, and great, I've got, I'm just going to capture anybody who comes within distance of the antenna around this building, and I can capture where all of their cell phones are. So part of what cyber stranger danger is to me is to help people understand that when we say cybersecurity, instantly people think, oh, that's an IT deal. That's something that technical people have to worry about. We've got great IT people. They're always updating the firewall. They're always buying new equipment. That's great, but IT can't save you from an individual doing something that they're unaware of. One of my favorite things to do to penetrate companies is there's a little thumb drive. It's called a rubber ducky. You can have a payload on it. One of the flaws in computers is if you plug a keyboard into it, there's no protections from that computer to plug a keyboard in. Well, a rubber ducky has logic so that it looks like a USB keyboard to the computer. So I throw a thumb drive in the parking lot. Guess how many people will pick up a thumb drive they find in the parking lot and go plug it in to see if they can figure out who that belongs to? I'll bet it's really important. It could be a presentation for the board, or it could be this student's project they've been working on forever. The second they plug it in, I can download a payload onto that computer and I'm into the network and I own you. I own everything going on in that network. Piece of cake. I don't even have to get in the building. I just throw a bunch of thumb drives in the parking lot. Somebody will pick one up and plug it in because they've not been educated to not do so. Even IT people. I just did this recently. 2 weeks ago, I was consulting. A buddy of mine called me and said, I want you to try to penetrate my company, see how good we are. Took me a morning. And the director of IT was the one that picked up the thumb drive and plugged it into his computer in the organization. And the payload that I load on it, because I'm a white hat type of guy, not an evildoer. But the type of payload I do is when he plugs it in, it pops as a splash message on his screen saying, you've just been owned. And it then notifies me by email that, oh, here's the computer that did it, and the username and password that's on that computer, so I can then present it to the proper folks. People are our biggest challenge. That's why, to me, cybersecurity, stranger danger is something that we should really start stressing in every organization, in every career field, in everything that we do and that we teach. The challenge that we have is all the fancy tech and AI-driven, yes?
Question, so if you find a thumb drive on the ground, what do you do with it?
If you want to try to figure out what it is, what I typically recommend people is have, even air gapping a computer is challenging, but I will typically tell them to have a Chromebook type of computer that is not connected to any internet, any network, anything, and they can plug it in and see if they can read any files of it. For a couple of reasons on that. Chromebooks don't execute packages like that, like a Mac or Windows type laptop does. Plus, a Chromebook is really just the Chrome browser. It's very difficult to completely crash that machine. And if the payload is malicious enough that you actually crash the machine, Chromebooks are like $100. You throw that laptop in the trash and you don't deal with it. But generally what I recommend to organizations is, if it fell in the parking lot, I know this sounds harsh, but too bad. Throw it in the trash. Don't pick it up, don't do it, because now there's some flash drives that they're really getting clever with that you can build that use a watch-style battery, so they're self-powered, and they're actually broadcasting their payload over Wi-Fi. So that they're trying to do similar things to what my Raspberry Pi does, but it's doing it self-powered. So they don't even have to plug it in anymore. If I can get them to get it close enough, then I can spin it. There's also really advanced stuff that some folks are doing that, to be honest, I'm still researching and I don't completely understand. The noise that a physical hard drive makes, they can pick up the clicks and understand what ones and zeros, and they can do a pretty fair job of translating what that hard drive is recording by just listening to the hard drive. So sometimes they're just microphone things. So it is the current war that we fight, and it is absolutely the spy versus spy. Remember that cartoon, the black and the white spy? It is absolutely like that. That as soon as we find a way to protect something, there's somebody who found a way around it. It's become insane, really, of how crazy it is. And artificial intelligence and some of the supercomputers we have taken it to a new level. And when we get true quantum computing, it's going to blow everything up. Because right now computers are so fast, and I'll get into passwords here in a second, but guessing passwords are, I can do 15 trillion guesses a second, easily. So it changes the game. Quantum computing, multiply that times a billion. I mean, passwords will have to go away, but I'll talk about that here in a second. Okay, so one of the things that I like to talk to folks about is that when we talk about cybersecurity and the risks and things associated with it, is we always have to remember that technology doesn't have ethics. It's not the technology's fault that we had a bad password. It's not the technology's fault that we didn't update ourselves on security patches and protocols and things like that. The tech is just tech. Technology, for all of our advances, is just stupid. It does what we tell it to do. Whether that's from we tell it through a password, or we tell it what browser to go to, or we tell it what line of code to execute. It's just a stupid machine. People are the ones with ethics. And people need to think about things. In organizations, what kind of data are we going to store? I teach a lot in my class about big data and information systems and how companies can use data to do micro-targeting ad campaigns to make sure they sell us more stuff. And that's awesome. But sometimes companies are in such a rush to determine what data can we get. How much data can we get on these people? They don't ethically think about, do we really need to know that data? Is that really valuable? And they don't think about things like, who should have access to this data? And I think we need to be teaching individuals operational security. If they find themselves in a company network, they go, wow, geez, I now know the household income and what everybody in that house earns and how many cars they have, and they're thinking about buying a mortgage. Should I really have access to that data? And should I tell somebody about that? So there's a lot of ethical concerns. Now, GDPR in Europe, Global Data Privacy Regulation, they're trying to make some end runs on this, and it's had mixed benefits. The idea behind this regulation is forcing companies like Facebook and Google and others to make you very aware of what data they have about you and make it very transparent of how they're going to use that data. The way companies have translated that, you've probably seen it at the beginning of this year because it went into effect in April, is all the sites that you access just started sending emails. Hey, we've updated our privacy policy. Well, they did an implied consent off of that. So if you didn't reply to the email, or if you didn't go to the site and say, I'm not okay with that, they just assumed you were cool with it. And how many read all of those license agreements that came out in April? Right? Exactly the challenge. So they're purposely obfuscating what they're doing with the data by making sure that it's 80 pages long, that very few people are actually going to read through it to see what's going on. Again, it's one of the things we have to start educating our folks, because people are our first and greatest line of defense against any kind of intrusion or breach. Typical IT people love to look at things in layers, and in security terms, we call this a castle defense. If you think of a castle, you have moats and walls after walls after walls. So we think of this as a layered defense for security. In cybersecurity realms, we like to think of those sorts of things as we're going to have so many layers, it's going to be tough for them to get through. Except for the person that has the username and password to access the database. If they post that on a post-it note, all the fancy hardware in the world isn't going to save you. And so to me, teaching non-technical people where they're putting themselves in danger and where they might be putting their organizations in danger just through their daily operational things that they are or are not doing is critically important. And it's a missing link right now. I'm not seeing a lot of places right now that are teaching non-technical people, what do you do about cybersecurity? Because the second you say cyber, people who are non-technical go, oh, God, he's going to say like technical stuff. Right? We have to reach them and say, no, I'm not talking about how do you configure a firewall so it automatically I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how to make sure you don't get your personal data taken. How do you make sure that you aren't the weak link in the chain of your organization that you work for? Those are the kind of things I think we need to do. So, this is where I typically do a demo and hack people, because this is something that happens to others. But I also want to transition a little bit, and I apologize, this is a topic I could talk for years on, so I'm trying to rush and get through this topic in the time that Tracy wants me to do it. So, I like to also tell folks, because it's pretty easy for me to get in a room like this, especially when my devices are working, I can scare the pants off of people easily. I can scare you to the point that I've had students come to me after the semester and say, I don't want to go on the internet anymore. I just want to sit in a dark room somewhere. I'm really afraid. I'm always being monitored. It's always scary. Right? Well, it kind of is. But I want to show people as well, again, non-technical people, what are some really simple things we can do to protect ourselves? I usually start from an organization standpoint because, again, all of us are going to work for somebody. Right? I work for UCCS, and I work for lots of other media agencies and software companies and stuff like that, AAA, all kinds of companies. So you're going to work for somebody. So what are the things in those organizations we should do? Because right now, in my opinion, organizations are failing on some of these. So for example, typical policies that a modern organization has, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about passwords in a second, but organizations are atrocious in choosing passwords. Because in the 1980s, a NIST standard, National Institute of Science and Technology, came out with a standard that passwords should have an uppercase and a lowercase and a number and a special character. Well, NIST just updated that last year and went, okay, that didn't work at all. That's a bad Please don't do that. Because what they found is not only did computers advance to the point that it's easy for us to guess all that special characters, and people aren't really that clever. So when we try to hack passwords, we use what are called rainbow tables. So we have every word in every book in existence in a database. So don't use that. So every superhero name, all that stuff, we have all of those. We also know it's real clever, instead of doing an E, I do a 3. Because nobody thinks of that, right? Those things are easy for us to guess. So those guesses we put in a rainbow table. What that does is it makes it faster for us to guess those passwords. Well, it became problematic. And what they found was, and I'll show you here in a second, we can measure the entropy of a password, is the length of the password rules all. The longer I can make your password, the better. All those special characters do nothing. They really don't. It's not that they're harmful, except what happens in organizations today, and I've seen it, and I can't tell you how many organizations, because IT makes it so complex. So what do people do? Oh, mine is big boy exclamation 2, and then next quarter when they make me change it, 3, and next quarter 4, and next quarter 5, and next quarter 6, whatever. IT's going to make me do that. So if I really change my password, no, not really in the least. And IT makes it so that it's so complex, I can't remember that freaking thing. Well, I'm going to talk about that here in a second. So I have to write it down. But I write it in my special book. Nobody will find that, right? Except that guy I held the door open for coming in this morning that's wandering around. I mean, that guy might look at it, but you know, right? So we have to teach people not to do those things. We have to provide appropriate training for people that are not technical. Ex-military, and in the military, we talked a lot about operational security. You don't post on Facebook, hey, deploying to the Gulf, everything's great, right? You don't do those sorts of things. We have to teach employees that you don't do that. And it becomes dangerous. I unfortunately, when I was a COO at AAA, I did it at AAA, but probably a better example is when I was a VP at National Sun Media. We were a publicly traded media company up in Littleton. I had to fire an employee because of a post they put on Facebook. A publicly traded company. They were doing a selfie. They didn't catch that posted on their cubicle wall behind them was the P&L. By SEC regulations, we just released financial documents in the public realm. I had no choice. HR came to me and said, they violated our social media policy, they're fired. They were literally just doing a selfie of themselves. Had a similar circumstance where I had to fire a poor gal. She posted, the teams that worked for me, we would always have a series of goals and stretch goals, and if they hit their stretch goals, we had budgets set aside that they could do team building each quarter, so they could go do whatever they wanted. They had an amount of budget, they could do whatever. They did paintball and rock climbing, all kinds of stuff. They were going bowling, and she posted on Facebook, had a great quarter, out celebrating. Publicly traded company. Analysts were following her for whatever reason on her Facebook posts and took that as the company had a good quarter. In fact, our company had a big miss. Her team had a good quarter. They met their goals, but our company had a big miss. We got sued and lost. So she had to get terminated. Teaching people in organizations and as students that make sure you're very much aware of what's around you, what's going on, what data you're unintentionally bleeding out in the ether, because companies are ruthless. They are absolutely ruthless about if they're going to get in trouble for something you do, you're out. It's just the way the world is. It's the way business exists. So we need to teach organizations that kind of stuff. We also need to come up with a better mechanism of how we access things, how we actually log in and how we do this stuff. So we talked about authorization, who's allowed to access this database, this server, this equipment, that kind of stuff. So we need to make sure we understand who should and should not have access to it, but we need to come up with a better way of figuring out how we authenticate stuff. So I educate people a little bit on that. For example, from technical terms, we'll talk about something a person knows, like a username and password. This is the worst mechanism to protect ourselves on the planet. Why? Because usernames have to be unique. So what do most companies and websites do? Username's your email address. Awesome. I can guess half of this equation right out of the gate. And companies are so clever with email addresses, right? Because they're not all like bob.cook at whatever, or bcook at whatever, or rcook, or oh, there's two Robert Cook, well, you're rcook too, right? That's not hard for me to guess at all. Plus, all I need to do is get you to send me an email address, and I probably have your domain sign on. My email address is rcook2 at uccs.edu. Guess what my domain sign-in for UCCS is? rcook2. So we have to come up with a better mechanism, because now all I have to do is guess your password. People are really entertaining with what they do with their passwords and the kind of passwords they come up with. All right, so we have to come up with something better. So what we came up with is something the user has. So now I might have a username or password. Now we do what we call multi-factor authentication. I have to have a thing with me. Now in companies, I can have, this is called a YubiKey. I can have a physical USB device that has to be plugged into the computer I'm trying to access. And it has randomly generated codes and algorithms that, unless that's plugged in, I can't log into the site. Works great unless you have people that are prone to losing things. Then it becomes problematic if they don't have their YubiKey with them all the time. Same thing with the device next to it where it does a randomly generated code. So we advanced that to two-factor authentication where you have an app on your phone that we sync up with the server. So when you log into your stuff, your Gmail account, your whatever, it will say, great, what's your two-factor authentication code? And I have to have my phone, and I have to log into my phone through my PIN and all of that stuff, and then log into my two-factor authentication app, and then type in the code that it gives me in order to access that. So even if somebody guesses my username or password, they also have to have my device, and most people, they start getting panic attacks if they go more than 3 feet away from this thing, right? I mean, they start freaking out. So this is a fairly reasonable device for them to keep in front of them. So it means even if you guess my username and password, you still have to have my device. You still have to have the PIN code. And we all use PIN codes. Nobody uses biometrics to get in that, right? We'll talk about that. Right? You have to have my PIN code, and you have to have the code to get in my app. Then you get the code for my app. Then you can log into my site. So that little bitty thing that takes me 2 seconds to log into a site, an extra 2 seconds makes me just that much more secure when I do that. The next level we can do is we can do something that's part of the user, so biometrics. In companies, this is okay. If you go into high-end data centers and stuff like that, you can do retina scanners and you can do all kinds of crazy things, and that's fine. But for most people, I don't recommend using biometrics, meaning I don't recommend using the fingerprints on your phone, the Face ID, the stuff like that, for a couple of reasons. And this is where the tinfoil hat comes in a little bit here, right? For one, in the United States, this can be forced. This can be forced. By our laws, this is physical evidence. An authority figure can force you to put your thumb on your phone and unlock it. The PIN code is protected by the Fifth Amendment because it's in my head. So they cannot compel you to do that. Sure, they can throw you in the pokey for a couple of days and try to sweat you and try to get you to do it, but they can't force you to do it because it's protected by our Fifth Amendment. And so if you care about that kind of stuff, if you're concerned about people getting into it, just remember, and what I tell students is, yeah, because it'll never happen that when you're passed out drunk on your dorm bed that your roommate's going to put your thumb on the phone and send nasty texts to the girl you both like. You'd be surprised how many students go, that happened to me! That exact thing happened to me! Be surprised that kind of stuff happens, right? And then you see them go, oh yeah, I'm totally changing that. I'm not. Right? So we need to have and educate people on better ways to access servers and systems and technology that are harder for people to breach. Those are the kind of things organizations do. Now, what should every person that wants to exist on the internet in any way, shape, or form? This is really high level. I go into a little bit more depth when we cover this, but number one, and I love covering this in class, this takes me half a class. Let's make good choices. And I don't tell students, look, I don't care if you post naked pictures of yourself in places. That's none of my business. I don't care. But let's make good choices like, should we really be using open public Wi-Fi networks everywhere? Is that really a good idea? Should we be giving up security for convenience? Should we have a PIN code instead of a finger? I know you have to type like this instead of just put your finger on it. I get it. It takes an extra second. Should we really use two-factor authentication so that, now I have to log in there and then I have to type in the stupid code? Make good choices. Don't come crying to me, though, if you don't make good choices and then you get breached. And being breached can be a really life-altering event, because not only does all your money and all your credit and all that stuff go, but trust me, I had somebody use my Social Security number to file taxes. It becomes really entertaining for about 3 years to get that fixed with the IRS. It's really a problem. So it can have a big problem. So the first thing I tell them is make good choices. I also tell them choose a more secure operating system, and this gives me a big classrooms. Look, I'm sorry, Macs and iOS are inherently more secure for most people. Now you can make Android and Linux can be very secure, and Windows can be very secure, but you have to take steps to do that. You have to kind of stay on top of it. You have to be on the guard all the time. For most people, they aren't. Especially for most students, when I educate them, they get a brand new phone out of the box and they try to get Snapchat on it as fast as they possibly can so that they can send a Snap or an Instagram to their friends and say, look, I got a new phone. And they don't think at all about, wait, maybe I should do a couple of things to lock stuff down before I start broadcasting on this phone. So if you're the type of person that says, I just want to pull it out of the box and use it, I don't want to deal with this, then you need to make a good choice as to which operating system you're going to use. And again, in courses I go into a lot more detail. But the other thing that's critically important is staying up to date. Companies release security patches for a reason. It's because a vulnerability has been found in that software. And so you need to constantly be staying up to date. It's also one of the advantages that platforms like Apple and iOS have is that because it's a closed loop system, they can send updates as soon as a vulnerability comes out. In Android phones, for example, you're at the beholding of the carrier and the handset maker. So, for example, if you have a Google device, a Google Pixel, something like that, Google tries to send them out very quickly and you'll get updates right away. If you have an LG device or Samsung, they're about 30 to 45 days-ish before they can get a security update to come out. So that means when a vulnerability hits, you're vulnerable for 30 to 45 days before you can get that update. Now, can you do things like it's called rooting the phone and things like that so that you can manually force that stuff? Absolutely. There's stuff you can do to manually force that, get it in there. But again, you have to educate yourself and take those steps. So I generally tell people to pick something and stay up to date. I also tell people, always back up your data. And I like a 3-2-1. 3 copies of your data, 2 different mediums, at least 1 off-site. So if people keep stuff on a Dropbox or a OneDrive or something like that, that's great. You got 1 copy on your computer and 1 in the cloud. There you go, you got 2 down right there. Pick a third one. Windows, Mac, they all have the ability to plug in an external hard drive and stick it there. Or some of these services have to where you can have it backed up to your parents' house, your friend's house, whatever. Because there was a Mirai virus that hit a ransomware that hit last year, and they're making the rounds again this year, where if it gets to your hard drive and you get infected with the virus, it encrypts all of your data so you don't have access to it until you pay them a ransom in Bitcoin. Well, if you have all of your data backed up, you can just go to the last good backup you have and restore and tell them, I'm not paying you a nickel. You don't have to deal with that. Organizations need to think about this significantly as well. Choose good passwords. Believe it or not, 2017, these were the top most popular passwords on the internet. Real deal. In rank order. Password was the first one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Believe it or not. There are sites that people like me can go to. One is called Shodan. That it will scan the entire World Wide Web and it will show me any routers, servers, web cameras, etc. that have the default password that you get out of the box. When I first started here, because I didn't think well, my first semester here I said, yeah, look, and I clicked on a webcam. Never a good idea to click on a live webcam in a classroom environment because you don't know what's in front of that webcam. The guy looked good in that dress, but it wasn't what I was looking for. It really shocked me that, okay, I'm not going to click on that. But I do show them, yeah, there's sites here that you pull something out of the box and you don't properly secure it, I can see it. Ring doorbells for a long time had a security that people weren't aware of. It's great they're connected to the internet. It also means I can see your Ring doorbell too if I know what I'm doing, unless you take steps to protect it. So we have to pick good passwords. None of these are good passwords. The way we measure what a password is, this is from a kind of a techie, nerdy comic strip that we always use. But it's a very good strip that demonstrates we actually have a mathematical formula, if we want, that we can measure the entropy of a password. How good is a password? What I like about this comic strip is to show you an example of that. So this one is what a typical modern IT group would force you to do. And you have to have an uppercase, lowercase, special characters, all this kind of stuff. How typable is that password? Kind of a pain. So the likelihood of somebody writing it down or doing something like that is going to be problematic for us. But also when you go through all of the math and you figure out the entropy, this one has about 28 bits of entropy. Higher number is better. Now look at this one. Correct course, battery stable. All lowercase, no special characters, nothing. When I measure the entropy on this one, it's 44 bits of entropy because of the length. And so what I try to teach people with passwords is, quit worrying about the special characters. Length means everything. And what makes this so powerful as well is, while battery and maybe horse are common words that we would speak in the English language, putting those 4 words together blows Rainbow Table's mind because those words don't belong together. That's not a phrase in my favorite song. That's not the quote in my favorite book or from my favorite leader or whatever. Those are words that don't belong together, and they're very long. And how easy is that for me to type? Correct horse, battery stable. It's fast. So length of password means far more than all the complexities. Far more. And there are sites you can go to that you can plug in a password and it'll say, how long does it take you to hack this thing? How long will it take for a computer to guess this? And so I try to teach people, again, ethically it's our responsibility to protect ourselves. And simple ways that we can do that is do things like pick a better password. But if you do have to have really complex passwords, then use a password manager. All of these are great. every one of them. I personally use LastPass for a lot of reasons. I use LastPass. I like it. So a password manager, it plugs into your browser extensions. It works on your cell phone. It works all over. It will create passwords for you. My password to Amazon, for example, is 99 characters long, and I don't know it because LastPass does. And not only is it 99 characters long, it changes every time I log into Amazon because that's a setting I can do with LastPass. So every time I log in, LastPass will connect to Amazon and change the password. It's fantastic. The challenge with all of these is you have a master password to log into each one of these. So again, pick a good master password. And one of the things that people always say is, but wait, you mean you want me to put all my passwords in one bucket? Isn't that stupid? Isn't that something that's going to put me at risk? Maybe, if somebody can breach any of these password managers. However, your risk is incredibly minimized for a couple of reasons. For one of the things we also don't do in passwords is we do not use the same password on more than one system, right? Nobody in here does that, please, right? Nobody does that. We want a unique password for every system we log into. In my LastPass account, I have hundreds of passwords because when I go to that website and I want to clock in, LastPass pops up and says, do you want me to fill in the password? Yes, please. And I don't have to type it in the keyboard. I traveled in my corporate days, I would travel 48 weeks a year commonly. Every once in a while, somebody, I'd set my bag on the airplane seat and somebody would sit on it and snap it in half, and I'd have to use the computer in the business center. It's just like the world's most unsecure computer you could ever possibly use is a computer at a Motel 6 or a Marriott. That's terrible. But with LastPass, I can also keep on a little paper in my wallet. I can do one-time passwords. So I can log into that computer with a password that will only work once for LastPass, so I'm not actually typing in my real password. And then I can use LastPass to log in all the other sites. So if there's key loggers and stuff like that, they won't be able to pick it up when I'm using that computer. So there's a lot of reasons for that. But to answer the question of what if I'm putting all my stuff in one place, what if they hack these guys? Hackers get in everywhere. What if they hack them? What do I do? Well, the way they store data is what we call hashing, salting, and peppering. And I'm not going to get into a bunch of the technical details with it, but the bottom line is, if my password, let's say, is bcook 2017, they run it through a mathematical algorithm to create a hash for that. Very complex algorithms. That hash becomes all those yellow characters you see underneath it. That's done on my device before it's ever broadcast anywhere. So they don't actually know what my password is. The way those algorithms work is they're one way. You can't reverse that in modern algorithms. There's old ones, MD5s and stuff like that they broke, and they'll eventually break the current hot ones, SHA-256 and other things. They'll break them eventually, but they keep coming up with new ones after them. So they hash it. Then what they do is called salting. So what their algorithm says is, okay, I have his hash. Now I'm going to pick a bunch of random characters for his username. And anytime he sends me his hash, I'm going to add these characters to the back of it. And only I, meaning LastPass, is going to be aware of that. And then when I store it, they're going to do what's called peppering. They're going to pick a random character, in this case I said uppercase M, and add it to the back of it. And every time I send to LastPass, hey, I want you to do this password, what it sees is this hash, and then it has my salt characters, which are usually longer than 4 characters. And then it says, okay, send this whole character string lowercase a, then send it lowercase b, then send it lowercase c, then send. So it increases the complexity by 52 times beyond my hash. The way they store this data is stored in hash algorithms like this. So even if somebody breaches one of these services, this is what they'll see. They won't actually see my username or password or the URL of the site or any of that. They'll see hash, salted, and peppered characters in their database. So it's practically unusable data to them. So I recommend highly to people, use a password manager. Please use a password manager. So that you're not using the same password on multiple sites. Two-factor authentication we talked about just a little bit. Again, pretty easy. I use a lot of these sites. I like Authy myself because I use multiple systems. I don't like text messages. I don't like when you log into a site, they send you a text message because it's far too easy for me to spoof your phone and get your text messages. I don't recommend that. It's an app on the phone, so on my phone, when I log in and go to my Authy account here and log into it, whoops. It has randomly generated codes that change every 30 seconds. For each one of the sites that I would log into, it's a different series of codes. So whenever I go to log into that site, I have to put in my username and password and then pull out and log into my phone and log into my Authy account and then enter that 6-digit code within 30 seconds in order for me to log into that site. And when you get in that habit, I can log into a site in 5 seconds. It doesn't take me any time at all. Especially since I don't have to type in the password. I can just click LastPass and say, you log in. Works great. The other thing, students love this, I want you to lie. I want you to lie your keister off. When you go to the bank and you log in and they say, hey, in case you lose your password, we're going to ask you some security questions like your mother's maiden name, your favorite pet, all the stuff I can find on your Facebook profile. Lie. The bank's not going to send police to your house and say, hey, you didn't honestly answer what your mother's maiden name was. Right? Put Blinky the Clown. Put something other than the honest answer to that. Because one of the easiest ways I can social engineer and get into people's banks always ask the same 3 or 4 questions. Mother's maiden name, high school mascot, first car you own, etc. All stuff I can find on your social media profile. So all I have to do is go to your bank. All I have to do is know what bank you're at. Which again, as I talked about, I'm going to scan your cell phone. I'm going to see what networks you're attached to. I'll bet one of those networks is right next to your bank. No problem. So now I know what bank you go to. Then I go to that bank's website. Oh, I forgot my password. Oh, what's your username? Here's my email address. Okay, well, answer these security questions. No problem. I'm on your Facebook profile. I know what your favorite pet's name, what high school you went to. Done. I'm in. Now I own your bank. Lie. There is no reason to put that. And the neat thing about those password managers that I talked about, they all have a notes section. So for each one of those sites, in the notes I can put answer to mother's maiden name, Blinky the Clown. Answer to high school mascot, green sky over Boston, whatever, right? I can put whatever I want in there so that when I have to answer those security questions, it's not the real answer to that question. But it's interesting to me that because of our general goodness and that we try to be nice people, that we think a computer's going to like slap our hand if we don't answer the question accurately, correctly. It goes back again to these are not technical things. These are not IT-related patching firewall things. These are things educating non-technical people of little things we can do to increase the threat. Use a VPN, virtual private network. Creates a tunnel. I like this graphic because the equivalent is if you're sitting on a hillside and you're watching cars and trucks driving down the highway, I can glean quite a bit of data, right? Oh, there went a UPS truck. Oh, the iPhone just came out. He's probably got new iPhones on that truck. There's stuff I can see. But the second those cars go into a tunnel, anybody ever been to Boston? That place freaks me out, right? You come from the airport, from Logan there, and you go under the water, and not only are you in a tunnel under the water, but there's exits there. So if you're looking and observing the people going into the tunnel, I actually have no idea where you're coming out in Boston, because you've got 3, 4 different exits that you can come out under the bay in Boston. VPN tunnel is the same way. I can be here, and I can make it look like I'm in Sweden. I can make it look like I'm in China, well, not China, not so much, but I can make it look like I'm in Africa or Europe or in New York or in Dallas or whatever, and you can't see. So if I'm sitting in a coffee shop and I'm on a VPN and I have a Raspberry Pi device that's intercepting all of your packets, all I see is encrypted packets. I can't see what you're actually doing because your VPN will create a secure tunnel from wherever you are to wherever you told it to come out. So I recommend people use VPNs all the time. Encryption I recommend that they use, meaning on your Android, on your iOS device, on your Mac, on your Windows device, you can go into your settings and you can flip a little switch that says encrypt my hard drive. What that does is if it's not encrypted and I plug in one of those little USB drives, I can just scan all the data off your hard drive. If it's encrypted, I can't get any of the data unless I can get past your username and password and get into the actual device. So I recommend that people use that. Okay, real fast and then I'll conclude here. If you're a little more privacy conscious, a little closer to the tinfoil hat kind of stuff, I also recommend maybe changing how you use your browser. So these things, Ghostery, Adblock, Privacy Browser, or even the Browser Brave, prevent sites from tracking you. They also will prevent advertising and things like that from displaying on their sites. Will it slow your internet experience down a little bit? Probably not for most of you for the level of bandwidth that you typically have in the sites that you connect to. You'll be fine. But when you put things like that, Privacy Badger and that kind of stuff, it will specifically and aggressively prevent sites from loading what are called cookies and things like that from tracking your behaviors on the web. So I recommend changing to those sorts of things. I recommend also you can do encryption, and again, depending on how tinfoil hat you want to be, SpiderOak is like a Dropbox, like a Google Drive, something like that, but it has what's called a zero knowledge policy. Not only does it do that heavy-duty encryption and hashing, salting, peppering, all that stuff, but the way they store your data, they actually don't know which data belongs to which person. So even if they were subpoenaed, they would tell the authorities, I have no way of telling you which data goes where. For me, because I'm sneaky and a little bit evil, I use things like Veracrypt, where I can create encrypted containers because I like to hide in plain sight. One of the things my buddies that are in the FBI, cyber, and those sorts of things, that they said, we start looking at people that look like they're trying to hide stuff. So if you are hiding in plain sight, it's harder for us to see what you're doing. So I use Dropbox and OneDrive and all that stuff to store all of my files, but I have an encrypted container on there, one called Document. Now if somebody's paying really close attention, that document's like 10 gigabytes big. But all the rest of my folders, because there's some data I don't need to protect and equip, right? Presentations like this, I don't care if somebody steals this presentation or my notes for my classes, or it's okay if they steal that. But I also have scanned copies of my mortgage, my life insurance, all of that kind of documentation that I want to protect, because fire safes work great until they're flooded with water from the fire hose and then all that stuff dissolves. So I want it scanned in the cloud so I don't have to worry about it. Well, I have it in an encrypted container so that you have to be aware that it exists, and then you have to have all of those other credentials and the right encryption algorithm in order to decrypt that data and to be able to read it. But it means I can get to it from anywhere on the internet if I so choose. And then, because I'm weird and evil, VeriCrypt also lets you do a hidden and a public encrypted container. So it means that the same document, if I put in one password, it opens up all of my secret documents. If I put in another password, it opens up I'm a wise guy, a picture of a kitten saying screw you NSA, because that's the only thing that is stored in there. So if I were ever put under duress and had to, if they said you better do this or we're going to jail your kids or whatever, I can say, okay, here's your password. I did this just to make you mad. Right? You can also do other weird things that I show students, like steganography, where you can hide data within pictures. Actually, you can split the pixels within a picture and hide data within it, so you can send secret notes to people with pictures. It's fun. It's a neat thing to get into. The next thing I recommend people do is turn off locations, especially after I show the demonstration like I did. Unless you're doing Google Maps to get somewhere, unless you're doing an Uber so that they can find you, you really don't need location services on your phone all the time. And by having them on all the time, it makes it easier for people like me to track you. Once I know who you are and you've walked by my Raspberry Pi, so that I can scan all of the networks that you've connected to, and I can start spoofing your phone and start grabbing that data, all that location data does is allow me to track your patterns of behavior. So I know which coffee shop, which dry cleaner, which areas I want to plant little devices like this so I can pull all of your data off. Hacking somebody is not really what it looks like in the movies where you sit in a room and you penetrate somebody from afar. It's a lot of ground game. It's a lot of finding somebody, following them around, understanding their behavior. And the more I can follow you digitally, so I don't have to actually follow you, the easier it is for me to get all of your data and all of your information. And typically, if I'm trying to get into a really secure organization, I'm not going to go after that organization and their firewalls. I'm going to go after their employees. I'm going to start patterning their employees and find out who's sloppy with their data, and that's the person I'm going to get initially into the door, initially into the organization, and then I can start working my way through the layers of the organization. So turn off location. iOS instead of Android, again, just for the things that we've talked about. Use a VPN for everything if you're very concerned about this. So, in conclusion, trying to finish here. Cybersecurity is pretty easy for us to say it's a technical problem. We've got to have a better firewall. We've got to have more antivirus, more malware. We've got to have freaky passwords, all that kind of stuff. Where I think we're missing is to help people understand from an organization standpoint that we need to train the employees that work there. And even beyond that, we need to understand that the amount of data and information that we're tracking, that we're trying to protect with all these cybersecurity protocols, we have an ethical responsibility to understand what data should we keep, what shouldn't we, what visibility should there be for our consumers, for our users, of what data we're keeping. How do we make them aware of that? And when we are breached, not if, when we are breached, what's our protocol? What do we do about that? How do we notify people? Yahoo, for example, was breached a decade ago, almost a decade now, 6-7 years ago. And they didn't tell anybody. Nobody. They knew about it, but they didn't tell anybody. It only came to light when Verizon was doing their due diligence to purchase Yahoo. And Verizon had protocols that said if a breach occurs in Verizon, we have specific protocols of how we notify our users of what happened and what we do to prevent it. In the due diligence, Verizon said, excuse me, Yahoo, you were breached, and Verizon made it public. And Yahoo said, yeah, we did, but we think like a third of our records came out. And then Verizon kept digging, and Verizon said, oh, by the way, we're going to take $2 billion off of the purchase price of your company because of the risk associated with it now. Then after about 8-9 months of Verizon's continued due diligence, Yahoo came out and said, okay, actually our breach was all of our data. Somebody got in and was able to get all of our Yahoo data. And they sat on that knowledge for 2 years. So now, what I usually leave my students with is ethically, what did the organization do wrong there? And ethically, what did the individuals do wrong that were in that organization that allowed that to happen? But even beyond that, what is my responsibility to keep myself safe? Whose fault is it if my data gets breached and my password was 12345? Whose responsibility is it to keep me safe, not only in the physical realm, but in the cyber realm? And what am I willing to trade off for the convenience of all these cool apps and all these cool things that I can do versus the security of knowing I can still use those things, but I'm going to add one step in front of logging in so that I keep my data just that much more secure. Because if you recall, years ago, Rand Corporation did a study of criminals that did breaking and entering, and they said, hey, what was the greatest deterrent? And they said dog, and they said, oh, like a big Rottweiler or a Doberman. And they said, no, doesn't matter, little yippy dog. Lock your door and have a dog. And they said, really, why? That seems like that wouldn't be a big deterrent. And they said, we're criminals, we're sort of lazy. That's why we're criminals. If we bang on the door and it's making noise, it's not worth the effort. I'm going to go to the next house that doesn't have the door locked and doesn't have a dog because it's easier. Well, cyber is the same way. Doesn't mean that you're unhackable if you have a password manager and two-factor authentication and you encrypt all your data and you're very careful with your location services. Absolutely not. If somebody wants to target you and really work really hard at it, you can't be saved. But the people who are just generally scanning and looking for people, it's going to be like the dog in the locked door. Oh, this person's got clearly a really heavy password. They've got two-factor, and I can't find their location because they're turning it off on their phone. Never mind. It's not worth my time. I'm going over to this person that their password is big boy, and they've got their location broadcasting all their stuff everywhere, and they answered all of those bank security passwords honestly, because I can hack them in 5 minutes. Why waste my time and energy to hack somebody who took some additional steps to protect themselves? So again, we just have to think ethically, whose responsibility is it to protect ourselves? So thank you for your time.